Well, good morning, guests. And I'm on my own. There's no other hosts here right now at the front desk at Hotel Pacifico because Mike McDonald is on the west coast of Vancouver Island dealing with a few issues, so he will not be able to participate in the first part of our show today. He may be available a bit later, and Kate Hammer has got some work-related duties that she had to attend to at the last minute, so I'm on my own. But I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Later in the strategy suite, we're going to be talking about a number of issues that have been going around this summer. We're going to talk a bit about Premier David Eby's growing enthusiasm for liquefied natural gas development. We'll hear some second thoughts from a senior reporter in the press gallery on how the Charleigh Pollock life-saving drug controversy played out. A little bit of background there from Rob Shaw, which he may have helped, I may have had a bit of help from David Eby getting in terms of the background. We're going to check in on leadership reviews and races that are going on in two of the parties in the legislature, the Greens and the Conservatives. But the topic that we're going to start with today, and the one that our guest is really expert on, is a very difficult and long-standing problem in BC with a significant political impact, and that's intimate partner violence, which has been the subject of growing outrage and concern across Canada, but particularly here in BC in recent months. In July, 3 women died in a 3-week period, allegedly at the hands of men with whom they'd had an intimate relationship. The most egregious incident occurred in Kelowna July 4th when Bailey McCourt, whose legal name was Bailey Plover, was killed in front of many witnesses at a busy intersection. James Plover has been charged with her murder. That morning, he had just been released after a court appearance in connection with earlier convictions, including 3 counts of uttering threats and 1 count of assault by strangling. The provincial government had been responding to rising concern about the issue even before Bailey Plover's death. In June, just before the most recent wave of deaths, Ontario lawyer Kim Stanton delivered a lengthy report to Attorney General Nikki Sharma calling on the government to declare an emergency akin to a public health emergency. And Premier David Eby gave direction last fall to both Sharma and the Finance Minister, Brenda Bailey, to tackle the issue in their mandate letters. Our guest today is Angela Marie MacDougall, who's Executive Director of Battered Women's Support Services in Vancouver, and she's held that post for the past 20 years. Angela's been spearheading, with others, a province-wide campaign demanding action on gender-based violence. She's written 10 training manuals for women working in the field, has spoken on the topic across Canada, the United States, and China. Born and raised in Vancouver, where her parents met in the Black community in the city's storied Hogan's Alley, Angela was galvanized to action as a young woman by the rape and murder of a close friend, and then later by the birth of her own daughter. She's among many other responsibilities, an expert panelist at Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability. She's a longstanding member of the Vancouver Women's March organizers and a founding member of Feminist Deliver. So welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Angela. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Geoff. Nice to be here. Thanks for this opportunity to speak with you.
Well, you've had a unique viewpoint to observe this issue for the last long time and worked closely in it, very, very much in the front line. Is it worse now? Give us the long view. What's your take?
So yeah, I mean, it's been really challenging to think about the issue of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence because we have the pre-COVID time and then we have the post-COVID time. And leading up to 2020, I felt comfortable saying that we were definitely seeing some of I consider positive impact of the organizing that had been happening over 40, 50 years by anti-violence organizations, feminist groups, both here in BC, but also in other regions of Canada and globally. And with the advent of Me Too, the hashtag Me Too, and sort of what that has done with the culture. So leading up to 2020, we were seeing, I believe, some deeper, I would say, shifts in the root causes of violence. And that all got clawed back dangerously so during the lockdown period when we were seeking to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 and that lockdown, because it gave a lot of fuel and a lot of opportunity for intimate partner violence specifically to thrive. And then some other things to change in the culture. So the question, have things gotten worse? Yes, They have. We've lost some ground. We've lost some ground on the gains that we believe we'd made leading up to 2020. And we're in a new time with, sort of where this issue is sitting in the culture. And in the culture, I mean in the broad culture. Of course, each community's ethnic communities, social economic communities, regions have their own version of these issues, and nobody's more or less culpable. Um, there's differences though. But broadly within the culture, we've seen some big shifts. And those shifts I think people could recognize are helping in other places. Like, we're just in terms of what we're seeing generally in the world, we've seen that there's been some changes. So intimate partner violence, gender-based violence definitely has been impacted by um, whatever happened to all of us during those lockdown
So
times.
could you spell out a little bit what the positive shifts were that you were seeing and why you believe they've been rolled back? And then we'll come back a bit to the BC scene in a moment.
Well, overall, we were seeing that there was more engagement, frankly, by the broader community, was thinking about kind of recognizing the issue a bit more. We were seeing more interest with men who were more interested in having conversations about it and thinking differently, maybe about their intimate relationships or about their partnerships. That was making its way more than what we'd seen before, in the sense of that reflective thinking that largely came through Me Too, but it was also other places as well. And then we were definitely seeing a recognition of um, the importance of community-based services. So it was the cultural piece around what's happening in the culture and how people are relating to each other, and then what services are available, and then how are the systems responding to victims and survivors when they reach out. So those things were, ticking along in a way to say that we were noticing some shifts in the culture, and that was good. Not major shifts, but some shifts. But that all got changed during COVID. Everything just got blown out of the water, and any gains that we thought we'd made had we lost. I mean, I should mention one of the main things that was really important is that we started to see killings. I know this is such a grim topic for people to discuss, but we started to see intimate partner violence killings go down. And we had seen those numbers going down over the last few years, but during COVID time, they went up, they spiked, and they've stayed up. And that's deeply concerning.
What was your reaction to the three or four? There were a number of incidents in a row in June and July. Can you just walk through that for us and how you experienced it as a spokesperson for the women's movement?
Well, it was devastating, but it started even before that. It started back at the end of May, where uh, listeners might remember or may recall the case of a girl that was sexually assaulted in an office building at 41st and Cambie at the end of May. And that was the individual that is alleged to have done that had been released recently, and had a long history of this kind of violence, and had been released. And yeah, so that conversation about bail and releasing and the catch and quote unquote catch and release, that all flared up in a big way at the end of May, and that brought us, BWSS and myself, into the conversation in a different way, where we thought, okay, we have to do something different here. Like, we can't allow these things to be going on. Bail is one part of it, but that's not the only thing. And we need more engagement. So that started us really looking at this more comprehensively in the sense of a campaign and wanting to really drive some change. And then the killings, unfortunately, happened in July. Um, so it's been a couple of months of really horrific violence against women and girls here in British Columbia.
What's the reaction you hear from people in the system, like in policing or in the Crown prosecutors? I mean, there's a lot of discussion about catch and release, as you say, and concern over the years about whether police take domestic violence seriously. Do you feel you have allies there, or do you feel frustrated by what's happening?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, so when we talk about the system generally, we have to, if we're going to talk about police, then we have to split police up into municipal police and RCMP. They're very, very different when it comes to these issues, even though they're guided by the similar policies. and the expectations are the same in terms of a response and enforcing the law and all of those things. Yeah, it's been really discouraging actually to see these issues just not be considered important and dismissed in all kinds of ways. And so, of course, that's what we've seen, and it's something that we are very concerned about because we expect that police will follow the policies that they have that have been put in place. They've been in place for, decades, frankly. And so, and from our point of view, and knowing from our colleagues from around the province that do similar work, is that unless a victim has an advocate that is there and is going to help advocate for police to follow their own policies, oftentimes they will get a really bad response and a very problematic response. So when these cases came up, and particularly the case in Kelowna, that it wasn't a surprise, unfortunately. And I'm laughing not because it's funny. It's that these issues have been highlighted a lot for quite a long time. And this case, I mean, there's two ways that I've noticed when killings happen. Either the victim has no contact with anybody, they're on their own, they're living with the abusive partner, and then the violence, lethal violence happens. Or there's lots of system involvement, lots. And in the case in Kelowna, there was a lot of system involvement. And so I want to kind of unpack that a bit more to understand a bit more about that, to get a sense of all of that. But in that case, the Kelowna case was unfortunately something that we see all the time, not with lethal consequences, however, but the same kinds of failures, the system failures in that way.
Well, it was striking that as those issues broke out, Kim Stanton, as I said in the introduction, who's quite an eminent lawyer herself from Ontario, had been presented her report, which she had been commissioned by Nikki Sharma, the Attorney General. Can you tell us a bit about where that report came from and what Kim Stanton recommended? Because this was a lucky moment or a happy moment in the sense that the government had been working on a response. What was the feeling in your movement about that response?
Yeah, and we're all really happy with. I mean, on one hand, we were all really encouraged that the Attorney General Nikki Sharma decided to proceed with this last year. She well, remarkably, in her mandate, she had gender-based violence, intimate violence in her mandate, but it was removed from public safety's mandate. So that was interesting because that's where it had been held, and that's where most of the funding contracts for community organizations uh, are held. So they're the contract holders for the police response, the service side of the police response. The contracts are held for community victim services, for example. So it was interesting to see that that got removed from public safety and was given to Nikki Sharma. But she's done work on these issues in the past, so we're feeling positive about her kind of leading this and to look at the legal system. And so and I full disclosure, I was a part of I provided feedback to Dr. Stanton uh, 3 or 4 times. And we were encouraged by the final report because it really unpacked many of these systemic problems. And one of the big problems that it highlighted that I think was really, really, really good was how much the system just doesn't take the violence seriously, frankly. I mean, it just really is so normalized and kind of dismissed. And it's so shocking because we already know the stats are so clear. So, and the system already has all these specialized people that work in the system. So that have been established over the years. So it was kind of, it doesn't make sense, frankly. Like, how come we could have all these specialized services that are in Crown and in police, but then we still have all these gaps, and that unfortunately comes down to the individuals, frankly.
What does
Uh,
what does Stanton say we should do?
She has a lot of recommendations. 21. We've been looking at about 9 main ones, but the main thing that she's focused on is breaking down those silos between the different areas of the system, so police and Crown Council and others. Uh, she's also suggesting that there has to be an attitude adjustment, if you will. That's my interpretation of her report, an attitude adjustment for those that are in the system and that, they um, have to kind of look at themselves and as individuals and, and frankly, follow their own policies. So that was validating because it's something that, we've been saying, and it was good to hear her say that. And then she really highlighted the different ways within the system that these failures are happening. For instance, Crown Counsel, on one hand, we're telling victims to report to the police. And then on the other hand, Crown Counsel has been approving charges, like it's declined over the last few years considerably. I think it was like about 85% of those um, cases that would come to Crown would get a charge. And then now, like that would have been like 2017, 2018. And then present day, it's gone down to 76%. So that's a considerable drop in the numbers of charges that get approved, which tells us that something deep is going on within the system in terms of how it's addressing these issues. And so it was good. It was really good that Kim Stanton did the report. And it's actually, I think very informative for anybody. I recommend people reading it. I think we should know. And she gives some really good highlights around the stats. 48% of women and girls in British Columbia have experienced intimate partner violence from the age of 15 and up. That's a lot,
Hmm.
48%. Um, and then she also highlights that most victims don't access the police at all, which we already know, but it was good to have that validation. 80% don't.
She
So the vast
proposes
majority don't.
a declaration of that there's an epidemic or a pandemic, or tell us a bit about that and how it might work or make a difference.
Yeah, this is a bit tricky because the declaring of the epidemic, I think, started back east during COVID times. And I think it had to do with the health alerts that were happening at that time. And this idea, if it's declared an epidemic, that would then fall into that health framing that then would trigger a response, that would trigger funding and emergency actions that could follow. And so there was a call to do the declaration back in 2020, 2021, which didn't happen. And so I think that this is kind of a continuation of that. And she's notably one of the writers and in the commission that looked at that horrific case in Nova Scotia
Hmm.
of a mass killing, and that declaration was in that report back in 2021. So it kind of has followed that. We're not a big fan of this idea of declarations in this way, um, because, and I've heard this, and in who I've spoken to in government. Well, firstly, I know that the declaration isn't going to help the legal system. Secondly, David Eby already did that. He did a version of that in January. He did a declaration that it was an epidemic nationally, and then he
Right,
directed, as you mentioned at the top.
right.
So I don't know. That's the thing that ends up getting a lot of attention is that make declared an epidemic. But I get worried that these things are performative and they're not going to result in actions actually, and we need action, and we already know what needs to happen, and even more so now with this report.
Well, can you summarize those action points? Then I want to get back into the political aspect here in BC.
Well, the one that we're dinging, the note that we're dinging, and I'm dinging it all day, Geoff, really, is around risk assessments. And this is a tool. Let's just call it a checklist. It's actually more than a checklist, but for the purposes of creating an image in people's minds, it's a checklist of where we people in the system, police and Crown Counsel and frontline workers and others, judges, Ministry of Child and Family Development, anybody that's coming into a contact, that of a victim of intimate partner violence, then would be looking at this assessment and assessing for lethality. And so the risk assessment is something that we know works. And if it's applied, with rigor behind it, in the sense that there's some rigor around and discipline around systems using it. And so that's one of the things that she highlighted was the role of risk assessment and that that's an important thing. And so we're dinging that note because that's something that we know that government can do. And I'm hoping we've asked the premier and I've asked Nikki Sharma and I continue to ask the feds that they mandate it, that it's mandated. It's mandated for the police because it's optional. Crown Council doesn't even have to do it. They rely on the police. So if the police haven't done it, the Crown's not doing it. That judges need to do it. Everybody should be assessing for lethality because the research tells us that we can actually predict. There are indicators that will tell us that lethal violence is imminent. And in the case of Kelowna, that was there was the evidence was right there. It was like screaming at everybody. Like it was kind of jarring to see how clear this individual had lethal intent on their mind for at least a year and articulated that.
Guess, let's call this one a culmination. The federal government has just announced their decision on the item we've been talking about for months and months and months. The feds upheld the CRTC's framework that allows wholesale fiber access for internet services. Cue the celebratory hand clapping and confetti emojis. I added that little techno outburst because it's how our presenting sponsor TELUS must be feeling. You listeners know they supported the CRTC's decision right from the beginning. They're grateful for the government's leadership here and for the advocacy and support of the Western provincial governments too, because it reinforces Canada's commitment to real competition, consumer choice, innovation, and, so relevant in these times, nation-building investment. It also sends a strong signal to Canadian businesses and investors that our regulatory system is transparent and stable, providing the certainty they need to invest and grow. Back to TELUS to wind this up. They are passionate about building national infrastructure and technology because it benefits consumers and increases the productivity and innovation of our private and public sectors. And they'll continue to invest in helping address these challenges of our time: digital inequality, the responsible development of AI, the transformation of our healthcare system, environmental sustainability, and food safety and security for all Canadians. TELUS also just unveiled a new brand promise. 4 words you can read pretty much anywhere you see their logo. We're always building Canada. Powerful stuff, particularly now, and they mean it.
You've also pointed to the possibility of prevention programs in the schools and places like that. So that's at the very, very beginning of the trajectory potentially of domestic violence.
Yes.
How would that work? Is there any take up on that front?
Yeah, well, the stats say that 5 children in every school classroom has witnessed their mother being abused by their father or a father figure. So that's considerable in terms of numbers. And the stats also say that 76% of boys who have witnessed their mother being abused by father or father figure will go on to be abusive. This is, there's a couple of research papers that have been research that's been conducted that highlight that. So we know that prevention with the K-12 is a really good thing. There are programs that do exist. They're called the Peace programs here in the province, but they're completely underfunded and just devastatingly under-resourced. And it's never really been a priority. But that's a thing. We know that if youth get access to healthy relationships information, and this is really important right now because children are getting all kinds of information online, and a lot of that stuff is actually really harmful to intimate relationships. And there's not a lot of other information that helps balance all of that harmful information that youth are getting, so children are getting. I mean, I just saw a stat coming out of the UK right now about the numbers of ages 7 that are encountering violence against women online through pornography, online porn. So it's really harmful in thinking about how children are shaping their what it's going to mean to be in an intimate relationship. So we think that the prevention stuff around children and youth is really important, but also more broadly, there's nothing stopping the province or Canada or any of the municipalities in developing their own messaging just to make visible this issue because it's this kind of split between the public and private thing. Um, we're calling it a public safety crisis, but because it's happening at home, it's considered private, and therefore it's like that nobody has any jurisdiction over that, seemingly.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. But this is a period where gender issues generally are really fraught politically. But I would think in this what case,
hmm.
consensus would be easier to find. What's the reaction been of the Conservatives of BC to this work? You've talked a bit about Nikki Sharma, but have you heard from John Rustad's party and how?
No, we haven't heard for the party, but I've seen individuals, a couple of individuals, look like they're pulling stuff right off our website and reworking it. Like it's some of the language. I don't know if they're pulling stuff off our website or not, but there's such a similarity in words. But they're definitely picked it up, and they're focusing on the bail
Can you tell us
conditions.
who?
Um, Eleanor Sturko is one.
Hmm.
And there's an MLA, and I'll look up her name. I forgot her name, but she actually wrote a blog. I'll find her. Yeah, it's very interesting to see that because, in particular, because we weren't. I mean, we're not nonpartisan, and yeah, we're nonpartisan, and but we think that any good message is a good message. Christina Lowen.
Hmm.
So she wrote for in Kelowna about yeah, and really highlighted some of the messaging that we had had on our website, which could be anybody. I mean, anybody could come up with that message, certainly. But yeah,
Hmm.
so those two have come out. And what's interesting about their message on the from the Conservatives is that and historically they haven't really looked at the gender issues necessarily when it comes to these things. So, but they both did. Eleanor has, and so did Ms. Lowen. Like that was sort of interesting. I haven't seen that in the past with previous conservative um, representatives, and even when the conservatives are liberals or um, the names of the political parties are lost on me.
But gender-based violence is largely it's a phenomenon of men perpetrating violence on women. And those gender roles are still challenged in lots of ways in society. But I think that generally there would be a broader consensus politically that this is intolerable. And you're hearing that to the degree you're hearing anything from the Conservatives. So there may be potential for quicker action here than you might find on some other fronts, particularly on other gender fronts, which are like SOGI, which are basically completely polarized.
Yeah, well, that's one thing for sure that I've noticed now, which wasn't always there before. And I've been in this work long enough to have seen the different, kind of generations of this topic and how people relate to it. But it's definitely reached I guess a broader, the message is, kind of reaching everybody. And I'm talking to lots of men who are concerned and, concerned about the issue and those victims that they're aware of, but they're also concerned about their communities and victims that they don't know. And they're also recognizing that this is a problem. And it's been encouraging actually to see that engagement from men, just everyday men that have reached out to me on social media or emailed us or if they've seen something and want to know how to get involved and they're asking questions about how they can be helpful and also wondering how they can help their families, like they're concerned about their partners, their daughters, and even their sons. So that's a shift, and there's no political party behind that. This is something that we're just seeing in, a general, um, I guess, a consensus maybe around people within British Columbia. And, but we've been really pushing this message to, within the media so that we can kind of highlight these issues a bit differently than what perhaps is done in the past to be able to build more engagement from everybody.
But I think it was interesting to see the media reaction because I agree with you. It was more forceful and more willing to connect the dots than would normally be the case, especially when there were so many cases so close together. You also proposed that the coroner be required to do an inquest every time a woman died at the hands of someone under a restraining order. I think that's how you put it. How do you see that being helpful? What would that do for the debate and understanding?
Well, this is actually very important because it gives an opportunity uh, for the coroner to examine all of the issues that are um, at play and the way in which the system failed, and hopefully that we can then make changes with those systems. And uh, I think you might be referring to our request to the coroner, the new coroner, that was really based on a number of cases that we had seen here in British Columbia where women have had protection orders either through family law or through the criminal system, um, and where police did not enforce the breaches. It's one thing to have a protection order. It's another thing that if the party that's doing harm breaches that order, that becomes a criminal offense that then needs to be enforced by law enforcement. But if they don't follow through on that, what we've seen in a couple of lethal cases, and Stephanie Forster was one of those, and she was killed in 2023 or four. Um, when we what 2023, when we see those cases, what how are we going to hold the kind of the systems accountable for if they're not going to follow through on the policies and also the practices and the expectations that the community has. So the coroner report can be a good way, another way to highlight these cases, and it's you know if a victim has gone to the extent to where she's jumped through or they've jumped through the hoops required in order to get a family law protection order through the family law court or through a Section 810 peace bond through the criminal legal system, because they're concerned about their safety, then the system should be following through on enforcing the breaches. And that means, taking that next step. So um, we wanted to make it visible that if a victim has been killed while having a protection order, that would have to result in a more attention placed and hopefully accountability and change.
Well, I think
Otherwise, we're talking about a piece of paper.
it's already required in the case of people who die in custody, in police custody, or in corrections facilities. There's an inquest required. And I think one of the powerful parts of it is that there's a jury of regular people who are able to apply their own experience and perspectives to the recommendations. So you have a layperson or a big impact from having lay people participate in those discussions, and they bring a lot to the table, which you won't get necessarily in a bureaucratic process. But this raises another historical question, a difficult
Mhm.
one. BC's had some terrible history with regard to violence against women. The Picton cases was one, but also the Highway of Tears and the prevalence of murdered and missing women in Indigenous communities. Is there something worse going on in BC, or is this just BC's manifestations of a problem we see everywhere?
Yes. So each jurisdiction has its own. If we're talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, each jurisdiction has its own um, factors that contribute to the vulnerability that Indigenous women and girls face. And that is why we had the Missing Women's Commission of Inquiry here in British Columbia, but it's also why there was a national inquiry. And I should mention that one of the women that was killed recently at Water in Gastown, Water Street, and Carol Ivy Michelle Bell, who a Shwetwick woman, and she was killed during that 3-week period that we saw the cases in Kelowna and other places. Um, and I think it's important to note that the man that is believed to have killed her was arrested and then released pending investigation. I mean, I'm in conversation with the VPD, and it's kind of shocking if you could think that you could actually do that kind of harm to somebody, get arrested, and then just go home. Like it's just remarkable. So yeah, I mean, there's lots to say around it, MMIWG, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and there's lots of really horrible cases around police response still with Indigenous women and Indigenous girls. And there's the case of Noelle Osu here in
Mm.
Vancouver, for example. She was found deceased on in a room on Hastings, and the police, the Vancouver Police Department, one of the patrol members that had attended, was sanctioned for not following through on basic investigative practices. This is a longstanding problem that Canada's had from the very making of Canada as a nation in terms of how it responds to Indigenous women and girls and violence that they experience. And so that I don't believe has gotten much. Um, I mean, it's almost as if the crisis of the killing sort of shifts around the country, but the roots and the problems remain the same. And British Columbia, we still have our own problems here, and they haven't been addressed. And in the case of Noelle Sue, for example, but others, and including right now Ivy Michelle Bell.
Yeah, well, I think you've outlined some reasons why this should be a really critical political issue. Do you feel it is in a partisan political sense? I mean, maybe it's a bipartisan issue and everybody agrees it's terrible, but not much happens. What's your feeling at the moment about this?
Yeah, I haven't seen this much political, like electoral political engagement on this issue in my life. So something's different right now. Um, But I don't know what it's going to take to actually move anybody. I mean, it's one thing to be the opposition and to be, throwing rocks and boiling the water, about these issues. It's another thing to be governing. And so I don't know why this issue is so resistant to the kind of change that we need. I know that the Kim Stanton report is being looked at and that there's, groups and internally, and a lot of that report, those recommendations are focused on the internal operations of government. Um, but I don't, it's really tough because it is, I think, a political issue. And because if we don't have this kind of cluster of killings, then they end up being treated as one-offs when they happen, and we can sort of start and stop again each time, and that's a problem.
Yeah, well, I think the Kelowna one was so stark and so public in its execution that the it really struck a nerve with many, many people, but the connections may not be so obvious. You've worked in this field most of your life. Um, what message would
What are you
you
trying to
give?
say? What are you trying to say, Geoff? What are you saying?
I'm trying to say you've got a tremendous amount of experience I'd like you to share right now with us. What would you say to um, mothers and young women and girls about this issue? Should they be hopeful? Should they be angry? What would you tell them?
That's a really good point because, women and girls that are just, I mean, there's one thing to talk to me, which, I've made this my life, or it became my life. So it's every breath in, every breath out, every day of the week. But then there's people that just want to live and love and enjoy their life, and and are struggling, trying to survive and get work or go to school or raise a family, and um, so I think that there is broadly I think there's more discouragement from women and girls here in British Columbia, but also across Canada right now. I think that what I'm seeing, the Kelowna case, but then the other cases that we saw publicly, there was the Hockey Canada acquittal that
Mhm.
happened very recently with the five Hockey Canada team members and the complainant EM. Um, so I think that there's definitely a chilling effect happening within British Columbia right now, where women and girls are feeling discouraged. They're hoping that this issue won't touch them. they're, of course, I think, feeling concerned and sad for those where the issue is touching them. But it's the kind of thing when you live with this kind of violence that's just sort of there and, and recognize that it's a social problem. Mostly people don't want to face it and don't want to think about it, don't want to face it, just want to try and, enjoy life you know, so I always hope that we could get more engagement from our political people. I would love to have our mayors all around the province and during council meetings and at some point making the statement that they really care about their communities and that this issue has no place in their communities and letting people know where the services are. I would hope that mayors and council would stand up at a microphone and make those statements either in council or at a press conference and making it visible that they care. I would hope that that other elected people provincially would do that as well, including our premier would make that statement. That goes a long way because this is the kind of issue that's been allowed to be, rendered to the private realm and that it doesn't really hold a place in the public realm. So making it visible is very important.
Well, and I think you pointed to a number of specific and practical things that could be done that have been demonstrated effective too, that would be great to see action on. But it's always a struggle for government to highlight the changes that it is making. And
Why is that? Why is that?
why is that? Yeah, it's a really great question. I'm not sure, but I think you made a very important point when you say that it's a public issue at one level, but very much a private issue to the point at which it becomes intractable and violent crime, for example. It's in that development period where people say, well, it's really not my business, or I heard that shouting going on, but I don't want to step in. And there's a real reluctance to cross that line. And I think government does struggle with tearing down silos and so on. You and I talked offline about Kim Stanton's recommendation for a commissioner, I guess. So, once again, another independent body to watch the government to see if it's actually doing what it said it would do. And just setting up a commissioner can take hundreds of thousands of dollars and many, many months to find the right person, put them in place, and then wait a year for their first report. It's not a panacea, that's for sure.
Hmm.
So very difficult one. Yeah.
Well, and I'm into action right now because, yeah, I mean, not another dead woman, frankly, and not another failed, legal case, and that, I mean, for an organization, this organization that I worked for started back in 1979 with the whole goal of ending this issue, like ending violence against women, ending gender-based violence. So we do want to work ourselves out of business. So what is that going to take? I mean, it has to take, engaging all these levels, including politically, but also just more broadly in the culture. And so this is a really key opportunity. And I'm hoping that it won't get dropped in the next while.
Well, I can only say I hope so too. And I really want to thank you, Angela, for coming to Hotel Pacifico today. It's a really difficult and important topic, and you do a great job of explaining it. Hopefully, we can see some of the headway that you've been fighting for. And I think there's no doubt that the advocacy taken up by you and your allies is making a huge difference. Whether we'll get over the top and make some fundamental changes, we'll have to wait and see. But
Thank
thanks
you,
so much
Geoff.
for joining us today.
Thank you, Geoff.
Let's talk about innovation, because it's more than just a buzzword. At its core, innovation means turning new ideas into real-world value for customers, communities, and the planet. So what does that look like in the energy world? That's where our sponsor FortisBC comes in. With over 2,700 employees living and working across British Columbia, FortisBC is putting real dollars into real projects right here at home. Their Clean Growth Innovation Fund just got the green light to keep going through 2027 with $5.5 million a year dedicated to advancing new innovative energy projects. Since 2020, over $20 million has been invested into 65 projects, from turning farm waste into renewable natural gas to cutting-edge hydrogen research at Simon Fraser University. But here's the best part. This fund isn't just for big organizations. Whether you're a university researcher, a startup in its infancy, or part of a nonprofit with a bold idea, you can apply. If your project can help reduce emissions and build a better future for BC, FortisBC wants to hear from you. Learn more at fortisbc.com/clean growth fund. Sometimes the most exciting innovation is happening right in our own backyard, even right here at Hotel Pacifico. Fortis BC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Who do I see in front of me? It looks like, unbelievably, Mike McDonald. We've finally got the signal over the hump from Tofino, and you're back with us. So glad to see you, Mike. Time to
I've
discuss some
emerged.
strategy.
It is pouring rain here in Tofino, so
That's too bad. That never happens.
well, it hasn't been happening much in BC this summer.
No.
So I managed to find the only place where it's wet. Um, so I thought, well, I'll just stay inside and do a podcast today. How about that? But sorry, I
Well, it's
missed
been
the first part of the podcast today. It sounded like a very compelling interview. So thanks for taking that on, Geoff.
interesting politics, because as we said at the conclusion, so many families are touched by gender-based violence, and it's so difficult to move the dial on that issue, even though it's a nonpartisan one. I would think. I'm pretty sure it
Mhm.
is, but anyway, it's been a busy, surprisingly busy few days on the political front, in my opinion, for the last little while. We've been something that you're close to your heart, LNG. It appears that the that our premier is, in fact, he was congratulated by your old boss, Christy Clark, for his enthusiasm for LNG. Which,
Oh, I missed
how do
that.
you feel about that? Yeah, no, she was interviewed on, I think, Jastrow Hall or something like that.
Oh yeah. Well, it's got to happen for a bunch of different reasons. First of all, diversifying our trade so we're not as dependent on the Americans. But also, BC's perilous fiscal situation requires stronger economic growth to help our way get out of it. But I also think the arguments that are resonating with what I see out of the EB government is that and certainly Minister Dix is leaning into this, is that the LNG that's being exported from BC is lower emission than other LNG exported from other countries around the world.
Well, I think that
So,
the hook for our listeners, though, who may have missed this, was that the premier, went to Kitimat and celebrated the departure of the
yeah,
first or second
or third, yeah,
or third tanker of LNG for the Asian markets. He was just
yeah,
in Malaysia on a trip where he obviously talked about that with in Malaysia and in Korea and in Japan.
yeah.
And he contributed $200 million to Cedar LNG, which is a Haisla-owned floating terminal. Isn't it a floating terminal, I think, in Kitimat,
We'll
which
be
is going to
floating, yeah.
be taking now the 200 million is to electrify that, so the emissions of its operations will be very, very low. So the premier is certainly on board and starting to talk a little bit about trying to win a second financial and final investment decision on LNG Canada, which is the major one. That would be a further, I can't remember, $40 billion investment or something of that sort. 40
Well, it'll be
billion in
significant.
total,
Yeah, it'll
very
be
large.
a
Yeah.
massive construction project in Kitimat. It won't be another pipeline. There will be some compressor stations built along the existing pipeline, so there won't be a linear development like it was last time.
More
But
gas in the same pipe.
yeah, just making the more gas go through the same pipe. That's right. So that's a lot of investment on the table. And then the other project, Western LNG and the Nishka, just north of there, looking to bring forward a LNG facility at Tidewater on Nishka-owned land. And that's yet another huge project that replaces some of the jobs that have fallen away due to the completion of TMX, the first phase of LNG Canada and Site C. So, the economy needs these things. Canada needs to diversify its trade. We've got a resource there to export. So rah rah rah, got the pom poms on. Everyone can tell that. It's not without controversy. I think that's obviously why the NDP have been tiptoeing carefully, given some of the anti-fossil fuel crowd. But
Well, is it a shield against the demand for another oil pipeline? What's your take on that? I have my own
uh,
views, of course, but does
well,
does does he have to do? Does the EB have to do an oil pipeline now because Danielle Smith and others are written to it?
I don't think it's on him to lead it. I think it's on the Prime Minister and the national government because it's a pipeline that would cut across two provinces at least, and it would be federally regulated. Now, obviously, this is the same issue that previous governments have dealt with on oil pipelines, is that what is the provincial responsibility? And, Alberta and the Harper government had argued that there really wasn't much provincial responsibility way back when in 2010 or thereabouts. But clearly, the BC government being onside or offside makes a difference. And if EB's offside, it'll make it more difficult for that to happen. And I think it's an important signal to whoever the developer of such an oil pipeline would be, is if the BC government's going to fight it, they're just going to say, well, too much brain damage.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it won't change the fact that there's significant Indigenous opposition along the coast. And, whether David Eby supports it or not, the project will be in for a fight. That's the type of fight that would be larger and louder than what we see on LNG.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, in my view. We've talked about this before, so we shouldn't dwell on it too much. But my old boss, when I was on city council in Vancouver, was Mayor Gregor Robertson, who's refined his position quite a bit in terms of pipelines since he joined the Carney cabinet. But I don't think
he's now into refining. Yeah,
he's definitely into refining, right, on further thought. But I think it would be a challenge for the Federal Liberal Caucus at its current size, led by people like Jonathan Wilkinson and Gregor Robertson, to really fall in behind a major oil project at this point, given they can do the gas project with a minimal amount of controversy. But that's not what apparently the Prime Minister and the Premier talked about when they took time out from the Pride Parade in Vancouver on the weekends. We have a tweet from Prime Minister Carney's account saying, "We discussed getting major projects built and supporting BC industries like softwood lumber in the face of a rapidly shifting global trade landscape. We're going to build big things in Canada again with Canadian materials and Canadian workers," which of course we all want. But are we going to be building anything with softwood lumber, building a softwood lumber industry anytime soon, Mike? Or is that a dog that no longer can do much hunting?
Well, just breaking news today, Geoff, I don't even think you've had a chance to see it since you were doing the interview, is that the federal government has announced a big aid package for softwood lumber this morning.
Oh, okay.
And there's money there for retraining and money there for loan guarantees and lots of undertakings that the federal government will use, Canadian wood in procurements and things like that. So, in that there's federal money on the table for the softwood lumber industry, I suppose that's a good thing. But anytime the money's there for retraining and loan guarantees, it's not exactly, it doesn't sound like it's like, hey, we have a bold plan to grow the industry.
The latest decision even imposed retroactive duties on some of the smallest companies, right? It was a very heavy-handed American decision that came last week.
Yeah, and the issues remain for the industry domestically here in terms of access to fiber that Kim Hackstead laid out for us a few weeks ago on the pod, and getting permits through. And so they've got, that's an issue that the province can help resolve to make it easier. But then they've got these market issues with the U.S. It's a perfect storm for the forest industry. But yeah, that appears to be what, the PM and the Premier were talking about, which is an important issue. And some of the other stuff that we just talked about wasn't on the, at least on the public agenda.
No. So the Premier tweeted, "Mark Carney and I met yesterday to discuss softwood lumber and the opportunities for clean energy projects," which I think is becoming code for not bitumen, in response to Trump's unjustified territories. Our first priority is to protect jobs.
Major clean energy project. I think they're referring to the transmission line.
Yeah.
The terrorists. But do you think LNG is now entering into the NDP's definition of a clean energy project?
I think it's getting there a bit in terms of the Premier's stance on it, for sure, because if you mentioned the financial issue, and I think just being able to announce a major industrial investment like Phase 2, which, to be candid, the government has no choice on. The permits were all issued under the Christy Clark administration, so there would be an enormous cost to trying to tear them up. But just getting that second FID at this point, when gas prices are very, very low, apparently, I don't follow them closely, but I hear they're very low, would be a coup. And helpful for tamping down concern on the Conservative side that nothing's been done on the economy. But, the economic file, how do you feel it's going for the government, Mike? Are they making headway?
Well, proofs in the pudding quarterly report next month will give us a bit of a glimpse into how the Ministry of Finance sees it and how the economic growth is translating into government's fiscal situation. My concern is that some of that growth is really being driven by public sector spending, and will actually won't have as beneficial impact on the government's finances as private investment in British Columbia. So where we get more mines permitted, where we can get more energy projects permitted, forestry back on its feet, and beyond natural resources, having an overall investment climate that's going to enable high-tech growth and other sectors, tourism, you name it. But a lot of it is, economic malaise in Canada, and part of it is, we're hobbled by high housing prices, which makes it difficult to attract talent to the Lower Mainland, particularly to make some of these things happen. So a lot of complicated stuff the government's got to work through. The best they can do for starters is just to get out of the, resolve problems they have it in their power to resolve and make it easier. And some stuff's out of their control, and, can't deal with that. Can't deal with whatever's going to come out of Trump. But you can at least, wherever the provincial government's hampering investment, deal with that.
Yeah. Well, let's change the topic a little bit, because last time we were on, we were discussing a monumental migraine of a headache that Minister Josie Osborne was having at Health, which was whether or not to provide a special medicine to a young girl named Charleigh Pollock, who needed this very costly, I think $1 million a year medication to sustain her life. And first the government said no, they would have to cut it off because it wasn't making a difference. Then they changed their minds. Rob Shaw of the Press Gallery works for Czech and also for the writes for the Orca. Been one of the government's harshest critics on this front, but he started to change his tune a little bit, and I just thought it would go back to it because I think some of our listeners like to hear about how the wheels turn and how sausage gets made or not made. And this was an interesting piece because it seemed to me that he had an interview with David Eby, who he quoted, and so Eby said, probably an interview with Shaw that was exclusive, I think. There's no question in terms of the Charleigh case that the public was not served by the current structure we have. And when he says public, he means the government. The current structure of a committee that doesn't speak to the media, doesn't speak to the public, makes decisions behind closed doors, only speaks to the treating physician, and even then only through the Ministry of Health, resulted in a scenario where it appeared as though what was happening was the exact opposite of what anybody wants, which is politicians making decisions about access to medicines. Mike, this was the structure that was there for a long time. It was there when you worked in government. It was there when I worked in government. I never had any inkling of all of these aspects of it that the Premier's not pointing to. Was the government just flying blind when this thing happened? Was there a way they could have avoided this problem, or is this sort of an after-the-fact rationalization by the Premier?
Hard to say. I mean, I think part of it depends on how the minister's office approaches it. Part of it depends on the, the plaintiff, if you will, bringing forward the demand or request for medication. In Charleigh Pollock's case, the family was very, very media forward, very compelling.
Social media too, yeah.
Yeah, and they really went to bat for their daughter and did a very effective job. And not everybody does that to that extent, and that makes a difference. Josie Osborne's relatively new to the job. She may have taken a different approach than Adrian Dix did, or Terry Lake, and that may have made a difference too. But I do think part of it's also the pain tolerance level as well that governments have, and certainly in Adrian's case, there were some cases around cystic fibrosis that were pretty high profile, and I think he held the line a long time on those. And I think ultimately perhaps the drug manufacturers climbed down a bit, but my memory's a little hazy on this, but it's a combination of these things. And I understand from the government's perspective that the cost per medication is so expensive that, I think there's some resentment towards the drug companies who seem to be really milking these situations, right, and benefiting from them. But it's with rare diseases, there's only so many people that need these medications, and the drug companies need to have to justify the research and development that goes into these drugs. So it's a complicated story, and thankfully one that I didn't have to spend much time on when I was in government.
Yeah, well, I think I've asked myself, would I have spotted this one coming? I don't think I would have. I think I would have failed. But also, I think the difference here, which is one lesson I took away, is that it's one thing to decide not to start an exotic drug treatment for people who would benefit from it to some degree or other. It's another thing altogether to take it away from someone who's already had it, especially a young child. And I think that's where, given the fact she already been on it for 6 years, finding a way to get another year out of it was probably the right way to go from the get-go. It's obvious in retrospect, but it's interesting to me that the premier is now saying, "I'm going to fix this because it was crazy." It generally worked pretty well, and a couple of people have resigned from this committee since he made those comments. But
Every day in the health system, there are life and death decisions made using medical judgment, whether it's someone's not healthy enough or too old to get a transplant, or not well enough to undergo surgery or get chemotherapy or something like that. And those are, sometimes people don't agree with the decisions that are made, but those are medical decisions and largely go unchallenged, right? So in this particular case, it really captured not the imagination, but captured the hearts, I guess, of people, because it was so unique.
Yeah,
and it's a younger person involved too.
I think the government suffers more from closed emergency rooms than it does from this kind of a case, even though it's so high profile in the media, because the facts don't apply to too many people. But if I can't get into the emergency room, that's going to be a problem. And Delta was closed, and Mission, and so on. Okay, another open letter. Open letters, lots of them around. Developers writing to the Prime Minister and to the Premier, calling them to once again allow foreign investment in real estate. What's your take, Mike? Dead on arrival? Something that should be pursued?
I didn't notice a protest in favor of foreign investment in real estate in front of City Hall. Well, I think they've got an important point, which is that development is really slowing down. Housing starts are slowing down. Construction companies are all of a sudden becoming more idle, and this kind of roller coaster ride we go on in construction cycles. For the last 10 years, it seems, we've been told that cost escalations are due to rising construction prices. And so are we now going to see cost de-escalations? Like, I hope so. If it's going down. But I don't seriously think there's going to be a lot of political contemplation about backing off on foreign restrictions yet. One area I think they could back down on is if you live in Enderby and have a apartment in Vancouver, I don't think you should if you're Canadian, I don't think you should get punished for that. I think if we're Canadians, we should be able to buy real estate anywhere we want, not get punished. If it's someone if it's a foreigner, then I think, okay, that's a little more easier to swallow. But then we've got all these carve outs where, well, this municipality is not subject to the rules, but these ones are. It's over time, I think it's going to get some wear and tear on it. But fundamentally, I don't think they're going to change the approach, partly because they're also getting revenue on it now. And so they're, just as the property transfer tax we talked about last week in our trivia episode, just as that was brought in the 80s and was meant to be a bit of a response to back then what was foreign investment in real estate. Now that it's everybody pays it and it makes lots of money for the government, there's no way government's getting rid of that tax. And
well, I think politically too, it's the development sector always said, well, we're building for everybody, but it turns out they had to build for foreign investors if the wheels were going to turn, and now they want to get some of that money back. It's not clear that any money would come either, given the crisis in real estate in China, which was where a lot of that foreign investment came from. So, I don't think we're going to hear any more about this, although some senior leaders in the development sector were in favor of it. One who was not, interesting, was Rick Illich of Townline, who's a well-respected developer who made many of these points and said, I think we're going to have to find a different way to do
who's
this.
the chair of the UDI
model. Yeah. He was a little more circumspect.
Yeah. Well, I think writ large in the development sector, similar to the natural resource sector, which is permitting and the process by which they can get projects through the pipeline. And we've got a combination of where they have to deal with the municipality. Some are better than others. Some are smoother than others. But then if they're part of the provincial legislation applies, there's a whole nother set of rules there now too, which might be good for the developers, but takes time to figure them out. In some cases, public hearings aren't required anymore. So the landscape has changed a lot in the last couple of years out of a motivation to create more units, but it may in the short run have created a little bit more uncertainty about what developers should actually do and what they should pursue, or whether they should put the brakes on a lower density project and go for a higher density project and that kind of thing. So anyways, well, the fact that it's going down right now seems to show the policy responses aren't working as they intended.
No. Well, let's turn quickly to four people who are not relaxing at the cottage like you and I may be, but are on the leadership trail, just to bring our listeners up to date, or visitors up to date about John Rustad. We haven't heard much from Rustad. He's preparing for a leadership review, probably getting around to various ridings. He's got to win a membership vote in the fall to hold on to his leadership, which I think he's going to have no trouble doing. I don't know. But now Gavin Dew, formerly a BC United activist, MLA now in Kelowna, right? Has written a
Gavin Dew's
Substack
so old.
blog.
He's so old. He was even a BC Liberal at one point.
Holy smoke. Well, there's somebody who's really been around, but he's written something on Substack. Tell us what you read in that, his new screed on conservatism.
We just put out in the last day or so, and I think it's a call to conservatives of what kind of party they need to be in the future. And, I think his essential point is like we have to channel populist anger into purpose so that people see them, BC conservatives, as a government in waiting. And I don't think that's necessarily inconsistent with Rustad's approach, but I think Gavin's coming out, I think, as a means to try to bridge between what the BC Conservatives are today, but what they haven't been able to acquire from the remnants of the BC Liberals, right? And I mainly see that as a business community, Lower Mainland challenge for them, where seats that BC Liberals would win fairly comfortably in the past, like on the North Shore, and in the city of Vancouver, slipped away from them in the last
shouldn't
election.
Be controversial. Do you think it's going to be controversial advice? It sounds very middle of the road mainstream.
It seems pretty
advice.
straightforward. I mean, I think on the populist side, they might be suspicious that he's trying to turn the BC Conservatives into the BC Liberal Party, and woe betide them if that happens. Ha ha. But I think also Gavin will be, I'm sure he contemplated this when he wrote it. People will say, why is he writing this? What are his motives? But Gavin's been out in front of the parade on a lot of different initiatives of the BC Conservatives. He's a very high profile critic. So I would expect Gavin to be the one to lead these conversations. There are others too that play important roles in the BC Conservatives, but I think Gavin, he's running a leadership race before. He's clearly ambitious, and I think he wants to be in the center of the conversation. So good for him.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays. I don't see anyone at this point. It's for Rustad to win a large number in that vote because it's a yes/no vote on his leadership, not who else do you think would be good. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes.
I mean, the thing with the BC Conservatives, though, is in this leadership process, I don't expect Rustad's going to have a serious challenge with it, but their membership base is pretty small still. And, I think
what do you think it is?
Well, I would say it's probably below 10,000. And
really? Okay.
I think the issue is, and Gavin's kind of raising this a bit in terms of what do we want to be when we grow up? Well, one thing you want to be is a party with like 50,000 members. You want to have sustainable funding. You want to have riding associations that are active. And they're a long way from that right now. They've got a brand that was hot last year, and people generally know where they're coming from, which is good. They've got some brand clarity. They take black and white positions on things, but they got to get over the next hurdle. and that's always the hardest.
I want to turn to the Greens quickly before we say
Sure.
goodbye. Leadership race on. So there's two people running, and some would say, I would say maybe it's a bit of a children's crusade for two of them. Adam Bremner Akins is a student. I think they're both in their 20s, the first I'm going to talk to. Born in Port Coquitlam, worked in local business, does a lot of hiking, stood on picket lines. And he divides his time between the Greens, working at a
I'd be
restaurant and
concerned
tending
if
his
a Green
garden.
leadership candidate did not do a lot of hiking.
Yeah. Well, he also tends his garden on the family farm. He's
Yeah.
against Emily Lowen, she, her pronouns, renter, organizer, and advocate. I want to come back to her for a minute. And the third one is, in a minute, Jonathan Kerr, a family doctor, twice elected Comox councillor, vice chair of the Comox Valley Regional District, a doctor. He's chair of the recruitment committee that brought doctors to Comox. Obviously, on the face of it, I would say, okay, Jonathan Kerr's the one to beat, but this is a membership vote. Like, how many people do you
Yeah.
get to vote, join? And the sign-up period's on. And I noticed that Emily Lowen has received endorsements from Sephora Berman, who will pack a pretty heavy-duty membership list. She's, of course, a noted environmentalist
Yeah.
and so on. She's totally fed up with the NDP. Sean Orr, the recently elected COPE councillor in Vancouver, who also will probably have a bit of a membership list. And then Namox, whose English name is John Ridstall. He's one of the hereditary chiefs of the
Yeah.
Wet'suwet'en, who was very much involved. So showing a little bit of juice there, I think, and she's
Yeah.
got about 4,000 followers. She's really against oligarchs, Mike. And I thought maybe oligarchs was a term that was a bit too far out there for BC politics, but she's rolled in a bunch of pictures of oligarchs around Trump, or the tech giants and so on. And she
Right.
also names Chip Wilson and Jim Pattison as local oligarchs who she's fed up with.
Oligarchs doing yoga.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think
You'd think
she
there'd be some
could.
convergence with the Greens on that.
Well, it's interesting. I wouldn't rule out Emily Lowen based on the number of followers she's got and the fact that this could be a very social media driven thing. So interesting to keep track on that. Signups are ending in a couple of days, and it'll be too late then for the doctor and the other student to make much
Well,
headway on the sign up
if
front.
she does win, that just frankly brings even more clarity to the EB government that they can put some of this, they can move to the mainstream fairly comfortably because a hardline activist Green leader is going to have a limited audience. Where they've succeeded in the past is with more of a mainstream appeal with Weaver and Adrian Carr and Sonia, frankly, that they weren't seen as strictly focused on these fringe issues. They were attracting some middle class votes. And she does not appear to be that type of candidate. Jonathan Kerr, on the surface of it, he's been elected. He's been, vice chair of the regional district. He's twice elected city councillor. That one may have more broader appeal, but maybe more limited appeal within that activist base.
Oh yeah, can you get the signups? That'll be the question mark. But anyway, I think it's time to just about head down to the minibar for a quick drink before we go. You got anybody you want to toast
I've got
or
one.
take a shot at?
Well, I'm going to take a shot at the Prime Minister. How about that?
Oh my goodness.
And
He walks on water.
Well,
Everybody can see that.
This is very water based, actually, this shot, because he was at the naval base in the Noose talking about BC ferries. He had his binoculars on. He was looking in the distance and saw a BC ferry and made a crack about, hope it's not Chinese made. And I thought, okay, easy shot to make right now with that issue in BC politics. And the fact is, what's the federal government doing about it? They just had these hearings on Friday. And, Gregor's like, nothing to do with me. And Christopher Freeland, nothing to do with me.
I haven't talked to the rest of you.
And it's like, okay, can we just go back? First of all, no one said from the federal government, there was no ban from the federal government on procuring these from a foreign shipyard.
No.
In China. So the federal government had no guardrails if they were that concerned about it. Secondly, is that why aren't these being built in Canada? Everybody knows why, but everybody's saying we want them built in Canada. Well, because it's too expensive. Okay. It's too expensive, the labor, blah, 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 blah. So I'm giving a shot to the Prime Minister because I think, you're better than that. Like, it was a cheap, gratuitous shot. You're actually your government and past governments are part of the problem on the manufacturing capacity in Canadian shipyards. So, like, if I were EB, I'd be a little annoyed about it. frankly. He's got his own problems on this issue, but I'm just calling out the hypocrisy.
Yeah. Sympathetic to that view. Okay, I'm going to raise a quick glass here to Morgane Auger, who is, I think, the chair, but certainly a member of the board of the Pride Parade in Vancouver, which is a tough board to be on. There's a lot of turnover. They've seen their corporate contributions decline. Financially, it's difficult, although it's a wonderful event held every year for many, many years now. But Morgane also was dealing with some of the pressures from pro-Palestinian groups that were seeking to have assurances of various sorts before they would kind of give a seal of approval to the Pride Parade. I don't know what the ins and outs were. I don't want to be bored with them, but I want to toast Morgane for going on Facebook and saying, here's what my experience was during these negotiations. And it was certainly eyebrow raising to read some of the stuff that the board of Pride Parade had to go through. I think at some point they said, you know what, we've had enough of this. We're not going to continue this discussion. And they went ahead and had a very successful event. So without getting into the details of the argument, I want to toast Morgane Auger for kind of lifting the veil a bit and showing what it's like to be the certainly a very political job, being in charge of some of those discussions around massive public events like this, which are really part of the calendar in Vancouver and very, very important. So thanks to Morgane, and thanks for a very successful event. The whole Pride weekend looked terrific. And that's it for this episode of Hotel Pacifico. So thanks very much, Mike, for coming in out of the rain. Thanks to Angela Marie MacDougall for checking in. And as usual, to our presenting sponsors, TELUS and Fortis BC. And see you next week in BC. You can never leave.